Hi, Jim Carr again. Dennis, I know that some in our audience don't know the finer points of hockey. Could you tell them, for example, what is icing?
Well, icing happen when the puck come down, bang, before the other guys. Mm-hmm. Nobody there, Mm-hmm. My arm comes out, then the game stop, then start up.
Mm-hmm. I see. What is high sticking?
High sticking happen when the guy take the stick, when he go like that. You don't do that.
You don't do that?
Oh, no, never.
Why not?
Against the rules. You're stupid when you do that. Just some English pig with no brain
Dennis,
at all,
What is slashing?
Slashing is like that,
Mm-hmm. And there's a penalty for that?
Yeah. And for a trip also,
Oh.
like that. And for hook like this. And for spear, like that. Mm-hmm. All bad.
Bad.
You do that, you go to the box, 2 minutes by yourself, and you feel shame,
Mm-hmm.
And then you get free.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Puck short. Hello everyone, welcome to this week's episode of the One Puck Short podcast. I'm Ron McGregor, flying solo again this week, but several things in the AHL I'd like to talk about. We're a little later than usual this week due to illness. Apologies for those of you waiting for this week's episode to come out. Here we are now, and I'd like to start by talking about the Pittsburgh Penguins, who had a slightly ropey start to the new season. Sidney Crosby had a 5-game pointless streak, but they're starting to pick things up now. They're 8-2-0 in their last 10. Dallas and Los Angeles are also 8-2-0 in their last 10, but the Penguins have a 5-game winning streak going. That's the best in the AHL right now. Malkin has 4 goals, 10 points. Kessel, 4 goals and 8 points. I'm not sure if anybody saw it, but Kessel rang one off the bar last night. It fired off so quick, it went back into the Pens bench. I mean, that's like 40 feet for the puck to come off the bar and fly. It's pretty damn impressive that happened. It's hard to put into words how hard a guy must have to shoot the puck to manage that kind of velocity and distance to reach a bench. So yeah, Dave Perron also snapped a 23-game goalless streak last night against the Canucks. That dates back to March 15th of last season. I wrote an article on the blog last week or the week before, just wondering what was going on with Dave Perron, because this is a guy who put up some good numbers in St. Louis. He had some problems with injuries, notably a bad concussion. Came back, he had a decent run in Edmonton, being juggled about quite a lot, to be fair. I think he played more time with Sam Gagner than everyone, but it was hardly definitive. He had a lot of different line mates during his time with the Oilers. And when he was traded to Pittsburgh, it seemed like a perfect fit. They had a couple of injury problems at the time. They needed someone to play with Crosby and or Malkin, mainly Crosby again. But he's just not quite settled there. I don't know if it's just not as good a fit as he would appear on paper. He's got good playmaking skills. He can find the net. It's just not quite worked out for him. So maybe that goal last night against the Canucks kickstarts his season. But it was an interesting one, I thought, just because a lot of people wondered about the Pens. I picked them as my team from the East because I thought the offense, there was just so much talent there, especially with Eric Fair, Nick Bonino coming in to flesh out the bottom six, that they could hopefully make up for those defensive deficiencies, which they do have. There's no question there. But Marc-Andre Fleury's been great yet again. He's not getting enough credit for the way he's been playing over the last couple of years. Fleury's not been the problem. The narrative sticks that he's a little bit flaky, but I don't think he is anymore. I think he's got a lot going for him now. He's still super quick, moving around the crease. His angles are excellent. His consistency's good. He's a guy who can play 60-plus games each and every season, and does so. And as in the last couple of years, there's not been any concerns there for me. He's looked a lot better. He had a decent playoff effort. Even though the Penguins were knocked out, he played pretty well personally. As Kevin Woodley pointed out on Twitter last week, Mike Bales came in August 2013 as the Pens goaltending coach. And since then, Fleury's looked like a different goaltender. He's always been a strong regular season goal, but there's just that little something different about him right now. And that could mean a lot, especially with a team, as we said, with some question marks on their blue line. So if they're scoring and Fleury's playing well, that's a pretty fearsome team right there. As I said, Dallas also 8-2-0 in their last 10. They head up the Central right now. 20 points, 10 wins, 3 losses. And playing some really exciting hockey. 46 goals for. I think that's the highest in the league. Second highest by Montreal. Still some question marks in their own end. They've given up 37 goals, which is pretty high. It's among the higher totals in the league of goals against. But if you're scoring, they're scoring. And this is the thing. Are Dallas one of these teams that kind of harks back a little bit to the old sort of 80s teams where you score 3, we'll score 4, or 5, or whatever. And with Ben and Sagan playing as well as they are, and Patrick Sharp coming in, Chushkin, Spezza, Hemsky when he's healthy again, they've got a pretty fearsome offense. But there are still things that need to be improved at the back. Niemi's been good. I think last year the big problem was that they couldn't keep the puck out of the net. Kari Lehtinen had a complete meltdown. He's not a great start to the year himself. But Niemi's been good. I think he deserves more credit than he sometimes gets. I'm not saying he's some outstanding elite world netminder, but he was often maligned unfairly, I think. He is what he is. He's a decent goaltender who will give you around league average goaltending, I think. And that's all Dallas needed last year. So if he can keep doing that, if Lehtinen can find his game again, if Sagan and Ben keep playing the way they're playing, oh boy, they are good as a pair. And then the Stars could do really well this year. Could they win the Cup? I still think there's a little work to do. It's a young team, just still ironing out a few kinks, particularly in its own end, as we've said a couple of times. But they're on the right path. Johnny Oduya coming in was a big one, I think, to helping bring on young defensemen like John Klingberg. So it's interesting to see how they level out. At the other end of the table, the Flyers lost 4 in a row now. They're 4-5-1 in their last 10. I wrote about them on the blog yesterday. This looks like a team, to me, who are in need of really a major overhaul, because they now have another coach in Dave Haxtell, who, fair enough, he has to bring his systems into place and get people to learn how he wants the team to play. But this is the same group under another coach, and Berube last year, Haxtell this year, who just don't look like they're at the races. And they've got a lot of bad contracts on that team. Some real howlers. Le Cavalier is well documented. Andy McDonald's been buried in the minors. He still counts for $4 million against the cap. Umberger is playing on the 4th line, and they're not going to move that guy. No way are they moving that guy. He's supposed to be $4.6 million per year until 2017. That's crazy. That's $13 million between 3 players. 2 are in the bottom 6 and 1's in the AHL. So that's tough. Evgeny Medvedev, he's been either scratched or he's hurt, depending on what reports you read. He's only on a 1-year deal, so they can walk away from his $3 million salary in the summer, but Jakub Voracek's cap hit jumps from 4.25 to 8.25 next year. That's a horrible deal. He had a fantastic season last year, but $8 million for Voracek on the basis of 1 year? Eesh. So, interesting there. As I said, you can read the full blog at onepuckshort.wordpress.com. My thoughts on the Flyers' need for a change. One Puck Short is brought to you in association with Eastside Hockey Manager, an in-depth ice hockey management simulation brought to you by Sports Interactive and Sega, developers of the world-famous Football Manager series, coming soon for PC via Steam. Another team kind of suffering a little bit for different reasons are the Blues. Brian Elliott was hurt. He was pulled from the game yesterday. He went back in, but was pulled again after the 4th goal against. He didn't return to the bench. He went straight to the trainer's room. He's apparently out with a head injury, possibly a concussion. Steve Ott also went down after trying to hit Brent Seabrook. Missed the Blackhawks defenseman, immediately dropped his glove and was clutching, I think it was his right arm. And the problem for the Blues here is if they've lost Elliott and Ott, they can call up Phoenix Copley. There's a very talented prospect goaltender right there to support Jake Allen, who's played extremely well this season. He had a great save on Anze Kopitar the other night in a 3-0 loss to the LA Kings. The Blues would have been in an even bigger hole without Allen that night, I think. He only gave up 2 goals of the 3, if I remember rightly. But the bigger problem they've got is that Berglund, Stastny, Shattenkirk, Schwartz are all on the injured reserve. Maybe Ott as well now. They've had to sign Scott Gomez and Martin Havlat to PTOs to try and fill holes. Magnus Piavi's been recalled from the AHL. This is a team who had a fantastic lineup who are suffering at the moment. As a few people said, if Vladimir Tarasenko should go down, they're in real trouble right now. This is a very talented team. They've still got a good blue line, and they're still doing well. They're 1 point behind Dallas in the Central Division, among the front runners in the West again, but the roster is starting to creak with these injuries. And they're not short-term ones either. These are guys who are out. They're not day-to-day. They're not expected back, in a couple of days' time. Berglund's got a shoulder injury. They take time. Shattenkirk, lower body. Stastny, broken foot. He's going to be out for a couple more weeks yet. Schwartz is out with a fractured left ankle again. Probably a month more for him. So that's going to put pressure on the Blues in a very competitive division, in a very competitive conference. Interesting to see how they ride that out, especially with Ken Hitchcock, who a lot of people think is under pressure this year to make that team succeed because they've got the goods, they've been dominant in the regular season, but they're yet to get over the hump in the playoffs. They've been embarrassed in a couple of playoffs where people thought they would do well. They've been embarrassed by other strong teams that they should have run a lot closer. Speaking of injuries, you can't fail to have noticed Connor McDavid is out, and we're talking months. And Peter Shirley was very specific, months, not a month, not a few weeks, months. He broke his left clavicle, his left collarbone against Philadelphia. Now, a few people are saying the best case scenario is he'll be back in 7 to 8 weeks. John Shannon of Sportsnet reported that the Oilers are internally talking about 12 weeks, but with these sort of injuries, it takes as long as it takes. Patrick Kane had a similar injury. He came back fine, and he doesn't seem to have any lasting effects on his game. So the best case scenario is Connor McDavid comes back and is fine, as Patrick Kane was. McDavid had 12 points in 13 games for the Oilers prior to the injury. How far this puts them back? Well, this is a team that wasn't very deep at centre anyway. Leon Draisaitl has been great on the right wing with Taylor Hall and Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. It would be a brave coach to split that lineup right now. Jordan Eberle is on the mend, so Todd McLennan may have some options in the coming weeks, but can the Oilers stay on the bubble while McDavid is out, while they're waiting for Eberle? I don't know if they have the depth. And even then, putting Draisaitl in as the second-line centre, he's still a young guy. And being a second-line centre on a Western team against some pretty strong bodies down there, Kopitar, Taves, Backes, guys like that. That's a big ask of Leon Draisaitl, no matter how well he's played on the wing on that top line. So, interesting times ahead. You can't necessarily stick Pouliot in there. He's not really suited to that. Mark Letestu as a second-line centre, well, maybe for a couple of games, but for weeks, months. But making a trade doesn't really make sense for Edmonton. Right now, they're a young roster. They are repairing several years' worth of damage. Things are definitely improving. I've been watching them play this year. It's night and day. And it really, really is. They're quite exciting to watch when they're on form. But this is an injury that sets them back. Naturally, McDavid's been their best player and one of the best players in the league through the first few weeks of the season. So interesting to see how their season pans out. Maybe this is the one that puts them back a step and sees them among the basement teams again, which is a shame in a way because they had started so positively. But on the other foot, perhaps not that unsurprising that the Oilers are taking it baby steps. And this injury probably brings expectations back into line a little bit more after a few weeks of positivity. Chris Kelly, also injured, a horrible injury for him in a game for the Bruins. He, under no pressure, seemed to maybe get his skate stuck in the ice or similar. He went down and it was obviously in pain right from the off. He fractured his left femur. He's out for 6 to 8 months. This is an older guy. Max Talbot's been recalled to fill that hole. And you kind of feel sorry for Chris Kelly in this one because I would like to say on the wane without wishing to be rude because he's an older guy now. He used to be a really strong depth player whose reputation maybe it precedes him a little bit now. He can still serve a purpose for the Bruins. I don't think there's any question there, but his usefulness is coming to an end, so to speak. He's a UFA in the summer. I wonder if this is it for him. He's 34 now. It's a nasty injury to receive as a 34-year-old, especially on a team like Boston, who maybe need to start thinking about where they're going as a franchise. They've picked things up a little bit in the last couple of weeks after a bad start, but there's still question marks there for me over what the direction of this team is as guys like Chara get older. It's going to be interesting to see how they react. As I said, Max Talbot called up to fill the gap, which is, not a bad swap there. It's reasonably like for like, so it doesn't affect the roster too heavily. But for Chris Kelly, it could be significant to his future. Ryan Getzlaf skating again for the Ducks. He was out with appendicitis. The Ducks obviously had a terrible run to start the season. They've learned their last two to get back on track a little bit. They beat Nashville 4-2 on Sunday. They beat Florida last night in the shootout. They play the Blue Jackets at home tomorrow. That's the end of a 3-game homestand for the Ducks before they travel to San Jose on Saturday to face the Sharks. It's been a rough road. A lot of people are glad they stuck by Bruce Boudreau. I'm one of those people who've talked about on the podcast in the last couple of weeks because it was such a bad start from what on paper is such a good team. But they've got good goaltending from Anderson. That's been a significant boost, and it's one of those things that tends to help a team find its feet again when they're in a slump. If you're getting a guy who can stop the puck like Anderson's been doing, then that papers over a lot of cracks which can potentially appear. And now they've started to find a little bit of offense. They beat Nashville 4-2. They struggled to score at one point. So the offense is coming back. In their last 4 games, they've scored 11 goals, including the shootout. So 10 plus the shootout winner, which is an improvement. They was really struggling at one point. It's not perfect. Perry's still struggling to find his game. As I say, Getzlaf still to come back to the lineup. But things are maybe on the up at last for the Ducks. They've won the last 2, as I said. It's going to be interesting to see if they can carry that momentum forward now and really pull themselves out of a hole, because, as we said on the last week's episode, the further you fall behind, the harder it is to recover the ground. I think Elliot Friedman said on November 1st last year, there were, 5 teams 5 points outside of the top 8 in each conference, and none of them made it, if I remember his 30 thoughts correctly, or it was maybe one made it. So once you've fallen behind, it is incredibly hard to recover in today's NHL. The Ducks, though, they have a kind of roster that can do it. They're currently 8 points behind Nashville in the second wildcard spot, or 4 points behind San Jose, who are third in the Pacific. So San Jose is probably the more relevant one here, especially as they meet on Saturday night. So interesting to see how they go. As I said, their defence hasn't been bad. They've only given up 31 goals, which is one of the better records. And it's in the sort of top end of the Western Conference, but they've only scored 17. And that's by far the worst in the league. I think the next lowest is Philadelphia with 24. And the Flyers are in a slump because their big boys aren't scoring either. Giroux and Voracek particularly, who only got 4 assists. Somebody I noted earlier on when talking about the Flyers. So, yeah, hopefully this is a turnaround for the Ducks, because they're a great team and they're playing well. Another team I picked to do well. I thought they'd go to the final this year. It would make sense. They've done quarterfinal, semi-final, final in the last 3 playoffs. So maybe that's a good thing for them. Maybe this kind of race to get back in it puts them in a different mindset. They haven't just rolled through the regular season. They've had to work for it a little bit more. So maybe that puts them in a better place come the postseason. And a few people said that about LA in the past, that because they hopped in at the end, it put them in a good place mentally to then compete in the postseason. Something Patrick Sharp referred to in Elliot Friedman's 30 Thoughts when talking about moving from Chicago to Dallas, what he sees in his new team in Texas to the Blackhawks. And he noted one year where they were dicing with missing the playoffs, and he said they found an extra gear and it carried them through to a cup in the end. So that's a significant comment given what's been going on in Anaheim. I think that Chicago faced similar demons where they might have missed the cut, albeit at different stages of the season. But that momentum carried the Hawks. Maybe it's a long way to go, but maybe that kind of momentum is the sort of thing that carries Anaheim forward. Some good news coming out of Arizona this week. The Coyotes' situation has been up and down for some time now, but there are possible options within Arizona for the Coyotes. People may remember the Coyotes have played in Glendale, the Gila River Arena. It's been known as the Glendale Arena and the Jobbing.com Arena. They've been playing out of the Gila River Arena since 2003, but the city of Glendale avoided the 15-year lease and management agreement back in June, which threw everything into disarray again, just as things started to look a little bit more stable for the Coyotes franchise. New owners came in. I have to admit, last season I was as sceptical as many others that it was just going to be another merry-go-round saga where an owner comes in, they lose a bit of money, they pull out, but things do look genuinely better in that sense. Obviously on the ice with Max Domi, Duclair, Martin Hansel's injured at the moment, but he's one of the most underrated centres in the league, I think. Things are positive again for Arizona, especially if Mike Smith can keep some semblance of form up. He had a lightning start, trailed off a touch in the last couple of weeks, but Oliver Ekman-Larsson's there as well. There's a lot to be positive about, and if they can find a new arena within Arizona, within Phoenix, or perhaps Scottsdale, and that seems to be optimal, really, because it means they haven't got to relocate, which is something the NHL, or specifically Gary Bettman, is strongly opposed to. And it means that they're not off to Vegas, so the people who've put time and money and invested in the Coyotes over the last years, decades, can still see their team. And I think that is something a lot of people are positive about. That this team actually maybe can finally work in that location. So the city of Phoenix wants to build an arena that the Coyotes could share with the NBA Phoenix Suns. And as I said, there's been interest there's interest in building an arena in Scottsdale as well. So yeah, it's one that's probably going to be a slow burner. The team's ownership has said they would discuss possible options, especially with the lease being cancelled, as we said. So where they go with it, that remains to be seen. But I think it's positive news for that team anyway. As I said, I'm hopeful they can maybe finally sort something out and really truly settle in that area. One of the main talking points for the last couple of days, Dustin Byfuglien had a decision not to suspend him for his hit on Brendan Gallagher. Now, at one point, there was, I'd say, concerns or queries whether he would have a hearing at all after the hit. Now, he did have a hearing in the end on Tuesday morning. Now, prior to that beginning, Darren Dredger of TSN suggested on Twitter that Byfuglien had been spoken to on at least 3 occasions this season alone prior to the hit on Gallagher. Luke Friedman said he knew it was at least once, maybe twice. So there's a little bit of disparity there. But the point is, Byfuglien has been spoken to about his conduct at some point this season. There was no suspension. Now, talking tos don't count as repeat offences. They're talking tos. Hey, guy, don't do that again. And that doesn't count as against any kind of repeat offender status chatter, though he was suspended for 4 games at the end of last season, people may remember. And I think the big sticking point here with Byfuglien is that in the last couple of weeks he's hit the highlight reels, shall we say, to be polite, 2 times already before the Gallagher hit. One was his pretty devastating hit on Jay Bouwmeester, which is spectacular to look at, but you wonder about, just because he travelled a fair distance and he threw Bouwmeester quite heavily into the boards. Now, for some people, that's the textbook hit, but something about it was very uncomfortable for me. I mean, I thought it was boarding, but as I said, it was borderline that you could say it was boarding or whatever. I can see both sides of that coin, definitely. There was the hit on Jason Pominville, which I was very surprised he didn't receive some sort of disciplinary measure for. As Pominville, to be fair to Pominville, he lost his footing, but he quite clearly lost his footing, and as Byfuglien basically cut in and sandwiched Pominville's head between his thigh and the boards, and that was reckless to me. That was a reckless play, and I was very surprised he didn't get something more significant for that. And then we have the hit on Gallagher. Now, the key point, I think, was that the Department of Player Safety said that although Byfuglien made contact with the head, it wasn't the primary point of contact. And that seems to be where it differs between the Byfuglien hit and Mark Stone of Ottawa's. Stone was suspended for 2 games for a similar hit against Detroit Landon Ferraro. But as I said, Byfuglien was deemed to have made contact with the head, but it wasn't the primary point. So that was almost a saving grace. But this seems to be a guy on watch, as it were. And I was browsing an article on the Hockey News earlier, one of the, from the archive links at the bottom was one that Matt Larkin, who was a guest on the podcast last season, one that Matt wrote about Byfuglien basically needing to grow up. He's going to cost his team. And this is a guy who is regularly among the minor penalty takers for lack of a better term, in the league. And it's a problem for some players, and Dion Phaneuf is one who's highlighted quite often for taking too many minor penalties and it being detrimental to his game, the Maple Leafs, to his trade value, all this stuff. And Winnipeg seem to kind of tolerate it with Byfuglien because he's that big of a player for them. They take the rough with the smooth, but at some point, and as I said, this article seemed pretty relevant again all of a sudden, just a few months on, that Byfuglien's been spoken to so many times already this season. I know Jeff Merrick on Monday's Merrick Rosinski podcast, which they record on a Sunday now. He was watching the Jets Wild game, and he talked about the idea of a great Jets Wild rivalry, obviously in the Central together. They could potentially get a playoff series together, some young talent, speed, some big bodies out there. And Byfuglien seems like the kind of guy who could do something reckless and really reignite, or should I say reignite is a terrible term because they've never had a rivalry, to ignite the rivalry. And so, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how his season pans out. They've obviously got contracts to talk about with the Jets. I tend to think they'll get something done with Byfuglien, but a lot of people weren't happy with that here. I know at McDunkey, my friend Matt tweeted about it before the show, asking how he didn't get suspended, but so the Department of Player Safety didn't deem the head the primary point of contact, so he avoids a suspension on this occasion. That about wraps it up for this week. It's just a quick show this week to get caught up on some of the news. As I said, there's a couple of new posts on the blog you can read at onepuckshort.wordpress.com. You can also find me at Twitter at RobMcGregor35. Facebook is facebook.com/onepuckshort. If you ever want to get in touch with the show, I mentioned my Twitter handle there at RobMcGregor35, or you can email onepuckshort@gmail.com if you've got questions, comments on the AHL or the British game, just grievances to air, feelings you want to get off your chest and get out there. Get in touch. Always great to hear from listeners and get your feedback. If you're an iTunes subscriber, if you could leave a review, that would be great. I'd really appreciate that because, the reviews are important to the ratings, to getting the podcast in the charts. I can dream. But also they're important words of feedback to let me know what you like and what you don't like about the show. If you're so inclined, I've added a donate button to the blog, onepuckshort.wordpress.com. It's there for those who want to support the site or want to support the podcast. Now, it's there because I do this because I enjoy doing it, and that won't change. My plans this year are bigger than before, and I plan things out more, so there's sort of breaks built in and things as well when the time comes. And I want this show to grow and the blog to grow, and for it to be something that people listen to and really enjoy, and new listeners come to and they enjoy it as much as others do. A lot of the feedback I get is positive, which is great. But as I said, it's not going to change. But the donate button's there just for those who want to help out, because obviously there's hosting fees, equipment to buy, and so forth. And as I said, it's not going to change what I do. I'll still do it. It all comes out of my pocket as it is at the moment. So it's just that little bit for those who would like to help. And if you do want to be one of those people, I will be forever indebted to you. But as I say, it's there, it's optional. That's about it. There's nothing more to say. Thank you very much for listening. Hoping to have an extra episode out this week at the weekend. Got somebody I've been trying to get lined up as a guest for a little while now. Hopefully hopping on, so we might have a bonus episode this week to make up for the shortness of this one if the stars align. If not, I'll speak to you all again next week. Thank you very much for listening. I'll speak to you all again very soon.